Puhemies!
Hyvää huomenta kaikki.
Good morning, everybody. The sitting is opened. And the first item on today's agenda is the Saravina report on the sustainable use of plant protection products. And our rapporteur has just rushed into the chamber, and I now invite her to take the floor.
Ja, guten Morgen.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam President and Commissioner Stylianides, colleagues. We are finally here, and first of all, allow me to thank all of those who have made it even possible to be here holding this debate today, because, as you know, a vote tomorrow is not something we could have taken for granted. It's an issue that was subject to many attempts to block. We had a very one-sided provision of information, to put it nicely, and no real support for our efforts to do something for the Europeans and their environment. So it's a delight to be here today. And we look forward to the vote tomorrow. It was a long path, and that despite the fact that there is a broad consensus in the broader population saying, yes, we want a drop in the use of pesticides. The risk for the environment, for our groundwater, our drinking water, our soil have become unacceptable. Almost 82% of those asked from Denmark, Germany, Poland, Spain, Romania, France have asked for change, and they are worried about the environmental impact of pesticides. 67% are worried about their own health and the health of their children and grandchildren, friends, partners. And science supports these concerns. There's a letter signed by 6,000 scientists on SUR and NAL, and it was a multidisciplinary approach, broad consensus for the reduction in pesticides, the increasing residues of pesticides, the drop in insect, the effects on soil, and the derivative products, which have not yet been investigated, are harmful, have become a huge problem for people, animals, and our environment. If you go and do your cleaning today at home and collect dust from your bedroom, I'm sure that you can guarantee that there'll be pesticide content in that household dust. But it's in our blood, it's in our uteruses. There are more than 1,000 environmental toxins, and we now need to seriously take on the task of reducing that. The long-term consequences for health, biodiversity, and our ecosystems, as well as our natural resources, is something that we need to stand up for now, because we have a responsibility, not just for our neighbours, but for our children, future generations, our grandchildren and their children. But we have a problem as well, that of protecting food security. So we need to ensure that our food security is protected, that biodiversity is protected. And we don't want to threaten those. What we've been doing so far is a real threat to our food security and the very basis of our existence. And it's not the Natura that is responsible for that. Studies show that overuse of pesticides are senseless. They cost more than they bring in profits. The European European Commission proposal for a toolkit relating to the use of pesticides and its reduction not only saves poisons in our environment, but it also leads to increased revenues. And that's something where we would expect to see farmers welcome this, to call for it. We're saying we're doing something for society and our own financial situation. Oh, I've run out of time, so I ask you to vote tomorrow for a strong sir so that we can respond to the wishes of Europeans. Thank you very much.
Paljon kiitokset esittelijälle. Ja sitten...
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. And now we're going to hear from Clara Aguilera, who's responsible for the Agriculture Committee's opinion.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. I should like to begin by thanking all of the shadow rapporteurs and the technical team from the Agri Committee for all of the work that was carried out in this committee. We just heard from the rapporteur from the Envy Committee, Ms. Weiner, and I recognize the fact that the report that has been presented here to the plenary, it actually made the Commission's proposal more stringent. Now, that is not just my opinion. What we can see is that this proposal continues to be an issue for European farming, as the Agri Committee has stated. Indeed, we saw that there was a rejection of this. Now, I will continue to reiterate the point. Yes, we agree with a reduction in the use of plant protection products over the course of time. But until we have agronomically safe alternatives, we will not be able to adopt these measures. We must continue with IPM. Therefore, we have presented Amendment 685, signed by 4 political groups, that sets the time at 2035 for implementation of this. We need to have the time so that we can have the effective alternatives. Therefore, what we saw from the Commission's proposal for the percentage of reduction for member states, there were a number of different problems from the member states, as you know. Therefore, we come up with Amendment 686 with a 35% reduction target by the member states. Now, it is extremely important as well when it comes to the reduction of plant production products in sensitive areas. It depends on the area that we are looking at. 687, the amendment divides this in 2 and states where there are major farming surface areas, categories 1 and 2, in biocontrol and organic farming applies. And I would like to state that the CAP cannot be used for everything, and certainly not for a drastic reduction that would be used for all of the standards that are going to be passed. In Article 43, we deleted that. Also, we need to make sure that we have enough food supply. Our proposal maintains that this will be the case. Thank you very much.
No niin, sitten...
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And now for the Commission, Commissioner Stella Kyriakides. You have the floor.
Madam President, honourable members, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to debate the Commission proposal for a regulation on the sustainable use of plant protection products. Now, ever since the Commission has adopted this proposal in June 2022, it has been the subject of strong and passionate debate, both among the honourable members in this House and also in the wider stakeholder community. And this is entirely understandable because the use of pesticides is both an important and a sensitive topic. Our previous discussions make clear that we can at least agree on one basic principle, namely the importance of protecting citizens' health and the environment, at the same time protecting the EU's farmers, agricultural production and food security. And because we agree on this principle, I believe it is possible to reconcile the differing views and to make constructive progress on this file. Constructive progress that will, on the one hand, respond to the demands from the citizens and consumers to reduce the use and risk of pesticides, but on the other hand, simultaneously ensure that our farmers retain an effective pest control toolbox and sufficient alternatives to the use of chemical pesticides. I note the emphasis placed on setting a positive target for the use of biocontrol and low-risk products. The Commission, and I wanted to share this with you, is working intensively with Member States, industry and stakeholders to promote the availability and use of biocontrol and low-risk alternatives to chemical pesticides. Our non-paper on sensitive areas highlighted numerous ways in which the use and risk of pesticides could be reduced in such areas and still protect our agriculture. We also provided a comprehensive complementary analysis after the proposal had been adopted at the Council's request. In our response, we emphasised how progress towards the pesticide reduction targets could be made without compromising our food security, and how the administrative burden on small and medium-scale farmers can be reduced and minimised. Now, turning to the international aspects, we must not lose sight of the goals agreed at COP15 Global Biodiversity Framework meeting in Montreal last December. One such international agreed target focuses on the overall risk from pesticides by at least half by 2030, included through integrated pest management and taking into account food security and livelihoods. This target comes close with the ambitions set out in the Commission's SURE proposal. President, honourable members, I have always believed that it is of utmost importance that all views on this topic are listened to both carefully and respectfully. The Commission has been doing that for the last 18 months. We have been showing pragmatism and flexibility. And I maintain that belief because I think it's our best chance at achieving progress. I'm going to be hearing all the points raised in this debate very carefully. I hope that they can be brought forward in the trilogue discussions that will follow once Council agrees on its general approach on this file. Once again, thank you for all your constructive discussions with this. I look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Kiitokset komissaari Kyriakides. Ja sitten...
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. And now, Michel Rivasi will present the opinion of the Committee on Development.
Merci,
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Commissioner. I know you're interested in arguments. I have scientific and political arguments. First of all, this is one of the most important pieces of legislation of this parliamentary term, this SURE regulation. And I want to congratulate Sarah Wiener for the tremendous work that she and her co-rapporteurs have done. There are two very important things in this world: safeguarding biodiversity, and we know that biodiversity is at risk from pesticides. All the science shows the effect of pesticides on flora and fauna. There are pesticides in water, in the air, and throughout the environment. And then there's health. Just a couple of days ago, Monsanto was presented with evidence linking Monsanto's pesticides with cancer. If you consider farmers' health and the occupational diseases suffered by farmers, clearly pesticides have a role to play. It's very important for us politicians to gain the upper hand over the agri-food lobby. We should be demonstrating to our voters that Europe protects them. Unfortunately, if we don't do that, the lobby will have won. This sewer regulation is of huge importance.
I should kindly ask you to stick to your speaking times. Ja sitten siirrymme ryhmien
And now speakers on behalf of political groups, starting with the EPP and Alexander Bernhuber.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, in kindergarten, we are taught not to play with our food, but what is of concern here is the way that we're playing with our food security. We need to understand the role of plant protection products. It's a tool for farmers to be able to provide food security and to provide us with food on a daily basis. I think it's very sad that we're talking about reference years, reduction targets, without really taking a view of the whole. What our farmers need is quicker access to alternative plant protection products and finding those alternatives. And there are more than one unacceptable points in your report, Ms. Wiener. Prohibiting all PPPs in sensitive areas, for example, and that would affect many areas in Austria that we greatly value. In your proposal, it would be almost impossible to carry out sustainable development here, and it would be those who are carrying out the best work who would be penalised. I'm also disappointed by the Commission. We're looking at the last remnants of Mr. Timmermans' work, because if a proposal has to be changed time and again, it can't really be a basis for the discussion we all want. However, we have the opportunity here to vote for reasonable legislation that sets the framework for the next 10, 20 years and guarantee food security. But I think we can only do that if we join together with the farmers and demonstrate that we at the European Parliament can find a broad majority for a reasonable solution, that we can solve problems with one another and not against one another. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Bernhuber ja sitten
Thank you, Mr. Bernhuber. Now, on behalf of the S&D Group, Maria Arena.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Eurobarometer shows us that European citizens are ready and requesting a more sustainable world without pesticides. These are stark statistics, but I could also tell you about the impact on biodiversity, on bees. But I should rather talk to you about the citizens. All of you here in this hemicycle, you represent these citizens, and they are requesting accountability. And quickly, I'd like to talk to you about a farmer. Throughout the course of his career, he used pesticides on his fruit trees. A few days prior to his retirement, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and now must fight for his remaining days. Physical and mental shocks, but even more. He laments the lack of information by manufacturers and the lack of protection equipment. Apparently, the protection equipment was worse for his health than without. I'd like to talk to you about someone who manages an equestrian facility using herbicides in his activity. This time, it is his son, prior to birth, was exposed in the womb to these products at 16 years of age, following malformations, has already had 54 operations. These are broken lives because of pesticides, and we have to add to this the ecological disaster. These are reasons why we must act. Now, I can also understand the farmers that are making requests. The overwhelming majority want to be able to produce better and not be prisoners to big chemical companies. Ms. Wiener's report, I'd like to thank her, is the best balance here in this European Parliament. It answers the urgency, asking for a binding reduction target in the use of these pesticides. I should like to call on you to reject the Agri amendments, and from the Agri Committee, these amendments will not meet our objectives that we are seeking. Now, I understand, ladies and gentlemen, that many of you are under the pressure of Agri associations, but let us be conscious of the fact that the elections are coming up. It's not the farmers who are going to vote, it's the citizens who are calling on all of us to be responsible. Thank you.
Kiitokset, edustaja Arena.
Thank you very much, Ms. Arena. And now for the Renew Europe group, Jan Heijtema.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Geachte commissaris.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner, honourable members. I'm not aware of anybody not wanting to reduce pesticide use, and that includes farmers. It's very important to make sure we reduce the risks emanating from pesticides. This is in the interests of farmers and the environment alike. It is clearly a waste if we use too many substances in order to produce a good harvest and then find out in September that we don't have much of a harvest. If we want to reduce pesticide use, it's important for farmers to have alternatives with which they can protect their products. And I'm not thinking in terms of genetically modified substances. Unfortunately, the modern alternatives are not yet easily accessible. There is an issue with permitting, and there is an issue with sensitive areas. In the field of medicines, permitting and authorization seems to work very fast. In the field of plant protection products, that is not, unfortunately, the case.
Kiitokset, edustaja.
Thank you. And now, Martin Häusling on behalf of the Greens European Free Alliance.
Ja, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, morgen können
Colleagues, tomorrow we can accept this proposal and send a strong message, because it's about protecting biodiversity and protecting the health of European citizens. And that is very much part of this approach. We need a different model of agriculture with different approach to pesticides, fewer pesticides. We need to work in areas where it's possible to use zero or very little pesticides. What's absolutely clear is that if we pursue integrated agriculture, then we can save the use of about a third of pesticides. And obviously protected areas need to be free from pesticides in order to protect nature. We need to send a clear message to European citizens saying that we take the protection of biodiversity seriously. Commissioner, if the Commission sends the wrong signal and allows pesticides for glyphosate for a further 10 years, then that would be the wrong message. We need to take glyphosate off the market.
Kiitokset, edustaja.
Thank you, Mr. Häusling. The next speaker is Mr. Vondra of the ECR group, but I don't see him in the chamber, and I therefore call Sylvia Lima, who represents the ID group.
Frau Präsidentin, Frau Kyriakides.
President Ms. Kyriakides, the proposal from the Commission on the use of plant protection would be catastrophic, not just for German farmers, but also for the scale of its impact for Europe. We have innumerable regulations which would further burden those who are already struggling, and also sweeping bans which would, for example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, affect 90% of agricultural territory. This is in addition to huge numbers of rules which well trained farmers see as a huge problem, and it would push them over the edge in many cases. It would be the end of many farms. So that's why I call on my German colleagues from the CDU-CSU, but also on the entire EPP political group. Please vote for our motion to reject if you don't want to be part of this green bandwagon. And the forked farm strategy has led to many negative consequences as a result of your votes in the past. So it's a time to show that you care about our farmers and our food security, and that you can put those above your party ideology. Ms. Wiener, you see food as if it were full of poison. Thanks to you, a large part of our food in the future would come from states outside the EU, food of dubious origin. Thank you very much.
Anja Hazekamp.
Thank you. The next speaker is Anja Hazekamp.
Welkom, commissaris. Bijen.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, bees, butterflies and birds are under threat of extinction. Farmers and their neighbours are increasingly ill with Parkinson's, cancer, other diseases. Drinking water is ever more expensive. Biodiversity is shrinking across the world. The common denominator here is the use of agricultural poisons, and this must stop. Millions of citizens and very many scientists and the Party for the Animals are calling for poison-free agriculture, calling for food to be produced in a different way, in harmony with nature instead of strangling nature. It's important to switch to sustainable agriculture. Supermarkets should be paying an honest price for poison-free food. We would also be helping to make life livable in the countryside. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hazekamp. Ms. Hazekamp, who was speaking on behalf of the left group. And now, on behalf of the non-attached members, Maria Danzi.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. Protecting public health is something that obviously goes through food security. Sustainable use of pesticides is therefore fundamental to contain any impact on human health, the environment, and animal health. It's one health approach. The Commission's proposal is an excellent starting point. However, we cannot forget that the quality of our products depends very much on training and support that we give to our farmers. We must assist them in embracing this transition, incentivize research in terms of farming systems without the use of pesticides, and first and foremost, increase controls on the markets, reducing the use of pesticides and import of any product from third countries. We must fight unfair competition. We can do more. Let us reform the CAP and put small farmers at the core, control on products. That means that we need to invest in a future in quality in farms. The benefits will be great and for all. Thank you.
Paljon kiitos, kollega Danzi.
Thank you, Ms. Danzi. And the next speaker is Alexander Vondra for the ECR group.
Stuck in the traffic, so. Dámy a pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll put it bluntly. The report prepared by Sarah Wiener is a bad report. It penalises member states that for years have been reducing pesticide use. It makes it impossible for them to define sensitive areas where there will be restrictions on pesticide use. The aim is to define these on a pan-European basis rather than taking local conditions into account. There is nothing but orders and prohibitions in here. There's no room for discussion. We know what the left think about new methods. Our farmers, though, deserve less green fanaticism and more realism, not for the sake of farming alone, but for the sake of consumers. Ill-considered regulation is going to lead to higher prices, and if the agri amendments don't get through, we will not be supporting this proposal.
Kiitokset, edustaja Vondra.
Thank you, Mr. Vondra. The next speaker is Franz Bogovič.
Spoštovani, v Evropski ljudski stranki tudi sam zelo podpiram in me veseli.
Thank you. In the EPP, many of us support a reduction in pesticide use, and there has been a 33% reduction over the past 5 years. This is a good thing, and a further reduction by 50% by 2030 is a good plan. In some countries, there's less of a need for pesticides, and you could actually reduce even further. But I also appreciate the role given to member states in defining sensitive areas. It's no business of the European Union to decide where there are sensitive areas in Slovenia or Austria. The fact is, sometimes there are orchards in these sensitive areas. Whatever happens is we have to maintain food security in the interests of Europe's citizens. We need to respect the environment, and I think that these proposals will help.
Kiitos, edustaja
Thank you, Mr. Bogovic. The next speaker is Mohammed Shahim.
Voorzitter, gif in de grond, in de lucht en ons grondwater. Dat klinkt absurd, maar dat is het niet.
Thank you very much. We see wide use of pesticides, and that constitutes a threat to our environment, our health. We see very serious illnesses caused by pesticides. The problem of phytopharmaceutical products is something that we should address together. There is an alternative. There are alternative products, but they need licenses being granted more rapidly. For example, biological active agents, which can be of great use to European farmers. We need to ensure, however, that such agents are used more broadly than they are used at the moment. That will enhance crops, enhance quality, protect the environment, protect public health. And allow me to recall the
Commission comes with proposals. We have Madam Kyriakides here, or van der Leyen. Address them, please, and not someone who's not in the room. Thank you very much.
Kiitokset, ja sitten seuraavaksi.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Emma Wiesner.
Lantbrukare är bland de bästa i världen när det kommer till låg användning av växtskyddsmedel.
Thank you very much. When it comes to a reduction in pesticide use, this must be done in a very careful and precise way. Now, we're not looking just at pesticides, but also the use of antibiotics, and it's good to be first in line in terms of these measures, but we shouldn't lose competitiveness in terms of cost, and this shouldn't lead to an increase in imports with lower standards. Now, we know that there are exemptions for some countries, but we have to set standards and make sure that other countries are meeting those standards. That is what Sweden has done. We shouldn't have a negative impact on competitiveness. So making sure that we are focusing on that for the Swedish farmers as well. Thank you.
För er. Så, kollegan Skyttedal, halv minut.
Tack, herr talman. Även med det här undantaget som Eva Wiesner talar om.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned the exemption. This has a high objective for reduction for European farmers. Now, we know that there are binding objectives here. One thing is extremely clear. We know that there will be a price to pay even if this has an impact on farmers.
Tvärtom, Sara Skyttedal, skyddar vi nu de svenska böndernas konkurrenskraft. Det är undantag.
Thank you very much, Ms. Skyttedal. We're talking about competitiveness here. We know that this will bring to a reduction in yield in pesticide use. We've seen that in Sweden. That means that other European countries must do the same thing, what the Swedish farmers have already done. It's extremely good for our farming system, the competitiveness thereof, but we know that there were costs in this reduction, and it's unfortunate that there hasn't been support for this proposal that will definitely have an impact on the competitiveness of farming.
The next speaker is Claude Gruffa. You have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, tomorrow, when you vote on the misnamed sustainable use of plant protection products, I suggest that you vote on the basis of your conscience. There is a European citizens' initiative to save bees and save farmers. That calls on us to abandon or reduce the use of pesticides. If that's not enough, then think about the fact that pesticides are the main cause of water pollution, the main cause of biodiversity reduction. If that's still not enough, think about our farmers. Think about our farmers who are first in line as victims of these chemical products. Unfortunately, there is no protection from prostate cancer, Parkinson's disease, leukemia. This is a major public health scourge, and there's no way we can help. What we have to do is to stop these chemicals destroying lives, destroying families. It is time to help. The victims and their carers are watching us. I want to thank Sarah Wiener for her work.
Paljon kiitos. Ja sitten...
Thank you. Mazali Aguilar is the next speaker.
Señor Presidente, señora Comisaria.
President, Commissioner. Agricultural sustainability is crucial for ensuring our food sovereignty and the survival of farmers. There's nobody better than them to protect the environment, but who is protecting them? The farmers are constantly facing economic difficulties and significant losses of their crops. And what do? We simply throw further obstacles at them. For example, reducing plant protection products, which are really play a role as medicines for plants. We don't take into account that this reduction could have a huge impact on their yields, and that's not reasonable. The behaviour and attitudes of so-called ecologists put the survival of farmers and food security at threat. The major paradox here is at the same time we're opening up our borders to products from third countries which are far from meeting the requirements that we expect from our own food producers. We need to develop strategies for sustainable use, yes, but without jeopardising farmers' capacity to protect their own livelihoods and the protection of food which is necessary for society. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Aguilar.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. And now Mathilde Androuet.
L'enfer est pavé de bonnes intentions. Ce règlement.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as is this regulation. It is laudable to want to reduce pesticide use, but there are scientific and social problems attendant. The European commissioners are proposing a regulation to reduce pesticide use by 50% by 2030 for no particular reason, without justification. This 50% cut is based on average consumption in 2011-2013. In 2011, pesticide use increased. This is not going to work without creating enormous problems, especially for farmers who are already suffering as a result of your standards. Unfortunately, there are not sufficient alternatives. There's also the question of implementation. What about these exceptions for tea and coffee? What is the point of creating a Soviet farming market? Why are we listening to these eco-lobbies who have no scientific evidence behind what they're proposing? Thank you. The next speaker is Sandra Pereira.
Obrigada, Presidente. Thank you very much, President. The unsustainable use of pesticides is having a huge impact on our public health, on our environment, and on our food. And indeed, we can see that this has a huge impact on our farming. We must have the precautionary approach in terms of the nefarious impact of these pesticides on our workers and on our people. We have to make sure that we have a productive system that goes hand in hand with environmental protection and with the protection of SMEs in the farming sector. The sustainable use of plant protection products is focused on a monocrop approach, and this shows that we need to have a completely different development model based on national production and food sovereignty. Promoting more environmentally friendly measures for our farming is important to make sure that our farming sector does not disappear, making sure that we use indigenous approaches and at the same time protecting our better and closer public services, ones that work for the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pereira. The next speaker is Edina Todt.
Tisztelt elnök asszony, tisztelt biztos asszony, nagy kihívás.
President, it's a major challenge that we have recently started to address. The left seem to be focusing on worsening an already serious situation. It is time to look at our conventional methods and through those guarantee food security. Because of the war, because of COVID, because of changing weather, we are already seeing an accumulation of crises. If food production volumes drop, prices will rise even further, and that's not something that we can tolerate. And the European people won't be in a position to pay for food. We need to find a compromise, striking a balance between ecological and economic concerns. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Todt ja sitten Peter.
Thank you, Ms. Todt. The next speaker is Peter Liese.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues, as a doctor and environmental specialist, I'm in favour of cautious use of plant protection products, and I'm in favour of reduction, but I'm against this proposal. In many cases, this proposal bans the use of chemical products, and it uses a definition of sensitive areas, which in my view is inappropriate. Believe it or not, in my constituency, the environmentalists are on my side. They are saying it is wrong to jeopardize the good cooperation that exists between environmentalists and farmers. I'm particularly in favor of Amendment 487. Ms. Aguilera, please listen. As Agri Rapporteur, it's your duty to fight for that amendment. Thank you. Thank you, Peter Liese. The next speaker is Maria Neuchel.
Liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, ich denke...
Colleagues, I think that we should make our decisions in a democracy based on facts. We know, and these are the facts, that the intensive use of pesticides leads to a reduction in biodiversity and the extinction of species. In protected areas, there was a drop of over 75% of insect mass. We know that pesticides lead to leukemia, Parkinson's disease, higher probability of cancers, diabetes. We know, and these are facts, that the EU has an approach to authorization filled with loopholes. There's no extensive research into the cocktail effect, on the effect of on soil health. There are millions of organisms which have not been tested for the impact on them of pesticides. We know that the industry has held back research showing detrimental effects, and I am in favor of stronger regulation of pesticides and therefore will vote accordingly. Thank you.
Kiitokset Maria Neuchel ja sitten...
Thank you, Ms. Neuchel. The next speaker is Elsi Katainen. Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner. Reducing the use of plant protection products is right to do at EU level, but it has to be done in a balanced way, and we have to take farmers with us. Unfortunately, the Commission proposal didn't take them into account, but now the Environment Committee's position has been improved. I'd like to thank the rapporteur, but there's more to do. It's right to recognise local conditions, for example, when defining sensitive areas. In addition, moving the target by 5 years to 2035 gives the sector more time to bring new products to market, which can replace the chemicals currently used. To provide us with food, farmers need to have the tools to do their job. Finally, this legislation must not lead to a situation where member states which historically have reduced pesticide use, for example like Finland, have to reduce even further. Instead, the legislation should focus on those areas, those countries where pesticide use is above the EU average. Thank you.
Edustaja Katainen.
Thank you, Ms. Katainen. The next speaker is Tilimets.
Dear Commissioner, dear President, first of all, congratulations to the Green Rapporteur, Sarah Wiener, for her tireless work on this file. Sustainable use of pesticide when it comes to chemical pesticide, isn't that a bit of a contradiction when it comes to our health, biodiversity and the health of our ecosystem? The less pesticides, the better, which is why we needed to increase the ambition of the Commission's proposal, especially when it comes to reduction targets. But today, one of the most harmful pesticides is likely to be on the market for another 10 years. Yes, I'm speaking about glyphosate, which the Commission plans to reauthorize because member states failed to ban it. And glyphosate is but one dangerous pesticide still used today. So when we vote on what sensitive areas are and what can be sprayed in and around, and please don't think of the short-term profit of big companies, but think of the people and the children that will be exposed to this pesticide. I don't want to have to tell the future generation that we failed them by failing to embrace less toxic ways of managing pests and producing foods. Thank you.
Kiitokset, kollega.
Thank you, Ms. Metz. And the next speaker is Bert-Jan Rijssen.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Mevrouw de commissaris, beste collega's. Rond vermindering van...
Thank you, colleagues. With regard to the reduction of plant protection products, I see that the situation is evolving in agriculture with using greater natural elements in certain areas, or we using specific alternatives. So there's work to be done. The objective of 50% reduction by 2030 is extremely risky. Does it leave us with enough headroom to fight against plant diseases and pests? I would think not. And there's also the definition of sensitive areas. It creates issues because it would lead to a total ban on plant protection products in key areas of Europe with an impact on food production. What we need is a new approach, a different approach, not rigid, inflexible targets. No, we need support for the sector's own initiatives, which certainly can reduce impact on the environment. I'm thinking about precision agriculture or the use of low-risk inputs. Thank you.
Kiitokset, edustaja Räyssen. Ja
Thank you, Mr. Rijssen. Now Rosanna Conte.
Ecco ideologia, ecco ciò che
Ideology. Here we have ideology. The majority of this parliament put forth ideology when it came up with dramatic reductions in plant production products. In fact, the proposals are more restrictive than what the Commission had proposed. Dogmatism. And perhaps they will realize it when the entire sector is at its knees, or perhaps that's the objective. I think we should state this clearly. These stringent norms go towards environmental interests, but without looking at the production or food security. In fact, all of Europe will be exposed to problems with food security, and we are looking to destroy European farming because, dear colleagues, our farmers do not need free advisory services on preventive measures. What they need is to be able to use the instruments that they need to be able to work, considering the fact that they don't have any valid alternatives at this time. Thank you.
Kiitokset, edustaja Conte.
Thank you, Ms. Conte. And now Katarina Rotnevedjalova. Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, all of us want good, safe food, and we need plant protection products. This is part of the EU's food security. The use of pesticides is not bad, but reducing it across the board by a half is wrong. There are differences between member states of the EU. For example, Slovakia has a very low pesticide use compared with West European intensive agriculture. I therefore cannot support the target of 50% reduction and a reduction to zero in certain areas. This will break Slovak farming and forestry. Colleagues, I don't think we're going to agree, but I think we do all agree we should have less fanaticism and more realism in this chamber. We have to grow food because people need to eat, and we have to protect our crops. And I think that what we should be doing is looking for alternatives. We should be looking at biocontrol, and we should be looking at banning monocultures and more support for farmers, of course. Thank you.
Kiitokset.
Thank you. The next speaker is Herbert Dorfmann.
Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you.
Chemie in der Landwirtschaft, weniger Pflanzenschutzmittel, weniger...
Fewer chemicals, in farming, fewer pesticides. That's a good thing. It's in the interest of everybody. It's in the interest of farmers. It will reduce their costs. Some people in this House are a bit simplistic. Farmers don't grow crops just because they feel like it. They have to grow their crops. They have to protect their crops from pests. It's all about safeguarding the harvest and farmers' income. Of course, there can be a reduction, and we need incentives to industry for research and development to develop new methods so that farmers have a real alternative. In the Agriculture Committee, most groups have worked well together, and we have good compromises as a result that takes both things into account. The desire to reduce plant protection product use and the desire of farmers to protect their products. And I think we should vote for this Agri-Committee compromise tomorrow. Thank you.
Kiitokset, edustaja Dorf.
Thank you, Mr. Dorfman. The next speaker is Christophe Clergeau.
Madam Commissioner, colleagues, the general debate on pesticides is interesting, but the specific debate on glyphosate is all the more so. Now, I was very surprised over the course of recent weeks that the Commission's proposal never changes. The member states' positions have never been factored in, nor have the positions of parliamentarians or stakeholders. It seems that it's obstinate, blind, and I'd like to call on all members of this parliament to sign on to the case on secret pratique that's going before the ECJ. Now, we know that there's uncertainty and scientific controversy. EFSA said before this parliament that the means to assess the risk of pesticides were not enough and that they weren't able to work correctly. 80% of scientific publications are thrown out based on the databases of EFSA for risk assessment. Now, let us make sure that this is based on science. You didn't even take into account EFSA's opinion. You just threw it back to the member states in terms of the assessment of risk and the protecting public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clergeau. The next speaker is Asger Christensen. You have the floor.
Tak, formand og kommissær.
Thank you, President. The Commission's first proposal to pesticide legislation was completely wide of the mark, and it could have shut down the entire Danish plant production in so-called sensitive areas. Of course, we must reduce the use of pesticides. We've done that by half since 2011. Danish farmers will use pesticide with new technology, but there needs to be a reward for such reduction. We need to put the carrot rather before the stick and focus on what is absolutely useful. We have good targets for 2035. That's a good date. And of course, we need to include CRISPR technology that will help us in this area. Precision agriculture is something that will drive development. But we need to improve the approval processes of biopesticides before we can actually phase out existing pesticides. We can't go too slowly. Thank you very much.
Kiitokset, edustaja Christensen, ja sitten...
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. The next speaker is Jutta Paulus.
Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. It is very interesting to hear people talking about their countries being in the vanguard of reducing pesticide use and therefore this regulation not being necessary. Let's come back to the scientific facts, though. The European Environment Agency has published report after report demonstrating that biodiversity is under threat. And biodiversity is not a value in itself. It is the basis on which we survive through drinking water, clean air, fertile land. The Environment Agency has demonstrated that farming is behind the use of pesticides in the EU. The Environment Committee has drafted a very good report in support of farmers. who will get financial support, independent advice. And it's very interesting to hear from the Agriculture Committee saying that they want to deny farmers this financial support. And quite clearly, farmers are not endangering their health just for the hell of it, and we really want to support them through this.
The blue card for you. Would you accept a blue card from Mr. Ben Huber?
Go ahead.
So half a minute, Mr. Ben Huber, and then half a minute from Mr. Paulus.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paulus. You talked about protecting nature in Europe, but even the European Commission is saying that we will be dependent on imports in future. The Saravina report demonstrates that we will have more imports. And don't you see a contradiction, because you want Europe to be green and yet we're going to be importing from third countries? The European Commission is basing itself on the fact that we're going to be throwing a third of food away, and that there are going to be whole areas where we're not growing food at all. I think it would make more sense to do something about that than to be thinking about imports. The EPP is usually voting against my proposals regarding limits.
Mrs. Paulus, another blue card from Peter Liese. And would you accept this blue card? I'm sure you accept it. So Peter Liese, half a minute, and then back to Jutta Paulus.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. You wanted to stick with the facts. The proposal is officially about plant protection products. If we could agree on the terminology is plant protection products and not pesticides. And do you think that the new cultivation methods constitute a means of reducing plant protection products, and will you join us in supporting these new cultivation methods?
Ich halte den Begriff Pflanzen.
Plant protection products is indeed misleading, especially in the case of herbicides, which kill plants. So plant protection products is strange. We should perhaps be talking about crop protection products. Maybe if we agree on pesticides, which is established in science, on the new cultivation methods, I'm not sure we'll actually get to a reduction of pesticides, and I don't know if farmers are that happy about the new cultivation methods with patented seeds, for example.
No more blue cards for you, Mrs. Paulus. Now it got a little lively. Good. Mutta nyt palataan puheenvuoroon.
And now back to the speakers list, and the next speaker is Krzysztof Jurgiel. You have the floor. Madam President, I'm in favour of rejecting the proposal in its entirety. We should not be voting for legislation which conflicts with the interests of our farmers. I have always been critical of this draft regulation. The Polish agriculture and forestry sector is very much under threat. There are politically motivated aspects to this legislation, and I'm particularly critical of the sensitive areas, which have been defined in such a way that in some member states they actually make up most of the cultivated territory. The methodology behind the reduction in use is highly problematic. There is a percentage reduction which is applied across the board, and that is wrong.
Paljon kiitokset, edustaja Jurgiel.
Thank you, Mr. Jurgiel. And the next speaker is Jessica Polfjärd.
Tack, fru talman, fru kommission.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Colleagues, European farmers need to be able to have a medium and long-term perspective and be guaranteed that they can use pesticides in a responsible way, in a safe way, if and when necessary. It's simply not possible for us to state that we should find a way to increase food production in Europe and then have a proposal at the same time that could hit our producers hard. Many countries in Europe have already reduced the amount of pesticides in use. Therefore, we should give more influence to the member states in terms of the definition, for example, of protected areas. No proposals should re-evaluate the agricultural sector. We need to take this time to look at farming not as a problem, but as a part of the solution. Thank you.
Blå kort för er. Godkänner ni ett blå kort från Emma Wiesner?
Blue card from Emma Wiesner.
Ja, så Emma Wiesner, halv minut.
Very good. Half a minute for Emma Wiesner.
M och KD när man
Thank you. Now here we are being traitors to the Swedish farmers. They have reduced their pesticide use and there are requirements. These need to be factored in. What we need to do now is to make sure that this proposal means that other member states do the same that what the Swedish farmers have already done, to show them the responsibility that they have taken, because we have to be able to strengthen the competitiveness of our farmers. Thank you very much for this. I do believe that we must find a way to make sure that Nordic countries that have already reduced their pesticide use are factored in fully for what they have done. It's the farmers who are saying this, that they are struggling very much to meet the objectives that the European Parliament is setting in this way. Therefore, they are stating that it's going to be hard for them to produce effectively and efficiently. It's not just a problem for Swedish farmers.
Thank you. Back to the speakers list, and the next speaker is Paolo De Castro.
Onorevoli colleghi, senza una partecipazione.
Colleagues, without the active participation of our farmers, any type of action to mitigate climate change will be unrealistic. Therefore, in our Agri Committee, and our rapporteur, Ms. Aguilera, and I'd like to thank her, has tried to find the best possible balance, an ambition one. So sustainability, as we have undertaken to do as the European Union, but also the needs of our farmers, to make sure that our farmers are assisted in this transition. Now, the work that we carried out has moved beyond ideological positions and has moved to pragmatic results, making the objective realistic to reduce by 50% in our plant protection products. But we need to have innovation to make sure that we can fight these pests with the new sustainable biotechniques. Colleagues, tomorrow we have a vote. Let us leave behind polarization to come up with a text that really does support environmental, social, and economic sustainability in our farming sector, but also in our rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Castro. And the next speaker is Andreas Gluck.
Sehr geehrte Frau
President, colleagues, a genuine strategy for reduction, yes, but sweeping bans, no. We're looking at multiple crises in the world, so safe and secure food security and production in the EU is essential. It's not an alternative simply to increase the burden on our farmers and reduce our yields, which would just mean we need to buy more on the world markets. When it comes to biodiversity, I have to say, frankly, that we cannot focus on restrictions again and again and lead when we're seeing greater world hunger. From the Commission and from the Parliament, we need to point the way, not just simply introduce bans. Sensitive area prohibitions is something that I would refuse. It would be particularly harmful for rural areas. It would throttle the agricultural culture and lead to the opposite of what the intention is. Yes, there should be limits, but only if it has a use. It needs to be of value to these protected sensitive areas. Thank you.
I think the rapporteur wants the blue card to you, Mr. Gluck. Would you accept the blue card from the rapporteur, Sarah Wiener? Of course, thank you. Sarah Wiener, half a minute.
Lieber Andi Gluck.
Mr. Gluck, you're talking about 100% bans, but what about the exception in sensitive areas that member states would allow pesticides in all areas? Why are you talking about total bans when they simply don't exist? Well, Ms. Wiener, I think we need to proceed together in Europe on this. We can't simply throw up different situations in member states. We need to start from a principled base. And I think there's a reversal of the burden of proof. Where plant protection products use is compromised, where they're not achieving the protection that they're designed for, yes, I believe that there should be limitations. But to start with a ban is not the right way around. I think, first of all, you should allow and then ban where necessary. Thank you.
Kiitokset, edustaja Gluck.
Thank you, Mr. Gluck. The next speaker is Anna de Panay-Grunenberg.
Frau Vorsitzende, meine Damen.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, more than a half of field birds are no longer there. Pesticides are at fault. Pesticides don't stay in the fields. The rain washes them into the streams and they become part of our drinking water via the rivers and watercourses. Finches, blackbirds, thrushes, are these going to be just a historical memory in future? Chemical pesticides should be seen as a last resort. We have to be able to stop this destruction of our farming sector. We need a radical reduction in pesticide use. And I call on you to vote for a strong SUR, and with your help, through showing responsibility, we will have a strong farming sector into the future.
Grunenberg.
Thank you, Anna de Panay-Grunenberg. And now the Chair of the Agriculture Committee, Norbert Linz.
Frau Präsidentin, Frau Kommissarin, liebe Kolleginnen.
President, colleagues, during the pandemic and the context of the attack on Ukraine by Russia, we became aware of just how important it is to ensure that Europe can provide itself with high-quality food. And this is also a principle that we need to bear in mind alongside the issue of climate protection and biodiversity when it comes to making the vote tomorrow. I believe that the proposal of the Agricultural Committee on reductions is the necessary approach, deferring to 2050, and the idea of protected areas, sensitive areas, and bans and prohibitions needs to be considered. The suggestion of the Environmental Committee is not the right approach. We need to avoid penalising those areas that have already contributed a great deal. And where I live, we have the latest cutting edge in eco-monitoring. We are cooperating with farmers, not confronting them, not opposing them. And that's the questions that we need to answer at the vote tomorrow. Thank you.
I think the rapporteur wants to present the blue card. Is that correct? We don't have the sign here. You have to press the button. Just a second. Mr. Lins, do you accept the blue card? Okay. Sarah Wiener, half a minute.
Yeah.
Mr. Lins, you're talking about protected areas that they should exist. Can you tell me quickly how you will protect such sensitive areas from the detrimental effect of pesticides? Where are they and how would you protect them? Well, Member Wiener, it's a question of reversing the burden of proof. We need to clarify that there is a threat to a certain species from a specific product and not start from the other end with comprehensive bans. And the exceptions decided upon by member states should depoliticize these issues. Member states with a number of protected and sensitive areas, including my home country, Germany, every 6 hectares is affected by such rules. So we need to have a practical approach and bear in mind the advocacy for farmers in these areas. Thank you.
Kiitokset. Ja sitten Günther Siedl.
Thank you. The next speaker is Günther Siedl.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin,
Madam President, Commissioner, we all know that whatever we release into nature eventually ends up in our bodies. This report is a key aspect of the Green Deal. We're in a situation where the 4 big seed manufacturers control 2/3 of the pesticide market. This level of concentration is wrong. We have to reduce our dependence. We need alternatives to glyphosate and so on. That requires a European effort for a research effort into an effective alternative to pesticide use. This is absolutely vital for the future of Europe's farming and food security.
Siedl, there's a blue card for you. Would you accept the blue card from Mr. Benhuber? Yes. Mr. Benhuber.
Thank you. Tomorrow we're going to be voting on the future use of plant protection products in Wachau. Will you be voting in favor of the Wiener report and the blanket ban that it contains? Or will you be voting in favor of one of the alternatives? We need to reduce pesticide use, and that is a trend that cannot be stopped. As regards Wachau, this is a sensitive subject, and I think that the proposal as a whole takes its interest into account.
Kiitokset.
Thank you. Daniel Buda is the next speaker. Thank you very much, colleagues. War is an indisputable reality. Hunger leads to migration, and food prices have risen to scarcely affordable levels. Today's debate cannot be divorced from this reality. The responsible use of pesticides has to be a goal for all member states, but especially those whose consumption is currently well above the EU average. There are countries which use more than 8 kilograms per hectare. But we also have member states that have understood the need for responsible use of pesticides. For example, Romania, which uses just 640 grams per hectare. Why is it that we're hearing the most from members from the countries which use the most pesticides? It's time for you to be reducing pesticide use. A blanket reduction percentage across the board would not only be deeply immoral, but it would punish those countries which have already acted responsibly and bring the European farming sector to its knees. The result would be bankruptcy of the sector, closure of farms, leaving the EU dependent on food imports from third countries. And don't forget that already now 33 million EU citizens can only afford a hot meal once every 3 days.
Edustaja Riho Terras.
Thank you. The next speaker is Riho Terras. Thank you, Madam President. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how this piece of legislation has reached us. It is unjust towards those countries which currently use minimal quantities of plant protection products. In Estonia, 780 grams are used per hectare. In Holland, 8 kilograms. Whether you apply a 50, 35 or 10% reduction in Estonia, it is unjust towards the Estonian farmer, and our competitiveness would take a hit. The former Commission Vice President Timmermans is now back home. He's met Dutch farmers, and he has agreed to take their interests into account. I therefore call upon our Green friends to vote against the injustice that we're seeing in this House. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Terras.
Thank you, Mr. Terras. And the next speaker is Mr. Zoido Alvarez.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner. Well, I thought we had learned our lesson. I thought after a pandemic and a war, I thought after an unprecedented drought, we had shifted our positions. But apparently the left of this hemicycle is poised to put an end to the production in Europe and in Spain, whatever the case may be. So this proposal and the amended version could have an irreparable impact on our European farming sector, continuing to impose arbitrary restrictions without any impact assessment. We will not allow this to happen without the farmers having some sort of an alternative to protect their crops. We will not allow these limits to be able to be enforced only on European farmers, whilst other products from third countries that are farmed without any restrictions come into our market. We have learned the lesson, and let us use our heads tomorrow in our vote in favor of food security for all Europeans. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustajat Zoido Alvarez.
Thank you, Mr. Zoido Alvarez. And now we have 7 requests under the Catch the Eye procedure. And I'm going to grant all 7. But do please, in return, keep to your speaking time. Peter Jaar is the first.
Olkaa hyvä.
Persönlich stört an dem Gesetz ist der Duktus des Gesetzes. Aus meiner Mikro, jetzt haben wir es.
Aber der Duktus des Gesetzes stört mich immer noch.
What I'm worried about is the philosophy behind this. In farming, we talk about the need to take an approach which is fact-based, but also protecting of nature. On the left of the House, you have to understand that farmers are not our enemies. They provide our food. The fundamental question is, do we want to force this upon them, or do we want to facilitate it? I want to facilitate it, you want to impose it, and I think that's the wrong path. Thank you.
Kiitokset Peter Jaar.
Thank you, Peter Jaar. Isabel Carvalhais is next.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, dear colleagues, now, today we are stating, because of science, that it is fundamental for us to put an end to the use of pesticides in order to protect the health of our farmers, but also us and our environment. However, we have to understand that we're going to need targets to meet these objectives. We are going to need to be able to look at the types of substances, but also in terms of the cost. That means that we will need a legislative framework that is more effective, simplified, and that assists us in using biocontrol. For example, the efficient implementation of IPM, that as in the proposal of this regulation, this is absolutely timely. It is important for IPM to be applied throughout the EU in a uniform way, and that should be updated with our increase in scientific knowledge on the subject. Thank you.
Mick Wallace, okay.
Thank you. Mick Wallace is next.
Thanks very much, President. The science is clear that the climate and biodiversity crises are the biggest threats to global food security. There's not a single serious scientist in Europe who would argue that this new pesticides regulation or the nature restoration law would pose a risk to European food security. The main objective of the proposal is not to even ban pesticides, but to replace them with safe and sustainable alternatives. Yet some of the right-wing groups in here have declared that their intention is to kill the pesticide regulation, and they have done their best to do the same with the nature restoration law. They want to delete the national reduction targets, which would totally undermine the chances of achieving the overall EU target, and to delay the 2030 reduction targets to 2035. They claim to be defending farmers and food security, but in reality they are defending the interests of the big chemical pesticide companies and industrial farming.
Thank you. Mark Tarabella is next.
Je profite de ce débat pour aborder la question des pesticides bannis.
Allowed me to address the question of pesticides banned here but exported to the world, because a lot of them banned in Europe are exported outside Europe. It's a shocking practice and it's unethical. If these products are banned on the European market, it's because their use is harmful for human health and biodiversity, as well as the environment. And what's not good here isn't good elsewhere. And further, that which we consider to be toxic here is lethal. The products also that we then import from these countries contain the very toxins that we wanted to ban. It's a boomerang effect. And who are the victims? The citizens. So we need to ban the export of banned pesticides in all member states and ensure that that is respected. Thank you.
Kiitokset Mark Tarabella.
Thank you, Mr. Tarabella. Sean Kelly is next.
I think as a result of all the legislation we have passed in this mandate, many farmers feel sometimes under attack and certainly not appreciated. And that's a pity, because many are making huge efforts to farm sustainably and reduce their carbon footprint. For instance, in Ireland, the targets in the Pesticides Directive have already been met, and farmers deserve great credit for that. But on the broader front, I think what we really need to do is to put more money and effort into research, so that there will be alternatives in place before we introduce bans. Putting the cart before the horse is not the way to do business. And if we do it the other way around, then we will ensure that farmers' incomes are protected, food security is guaranteed, and we won't be importing from places that have the same restrictions as we have.
Thank you very much. Kiitokset. Ja sitten
Thank you. Maria Grappini has the floor.
Doamna președintă, doamna comisar, stimați...
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, if farmers are listening to this debate, they will hear that everything is connected to everything else. It's interesting to hear those that want extreme prohibitions are those who are using the most. In my country, the farming market is being devastated, for example, by imports from Ukraine without phytosanitary checks. Why should we be using 300 grams per hectare in Romania when the Dutch are allowed to use 4 kilograms? This is going to destroy Europe's agriculture, and this is going to lead to massive imports from outside Europe of food full of pesticides. I think that the citizens have a right to know. They have a right to know that the green extremists are going to destroy us.
Next speaker, Josas Olekas. Floor is yours.
Ačiū pirmininkė, mėly kolegos. Gerbima komisarė, pritariu, jog reikia apsaugoti bioįvairovę ir stabdyti klimato kaitą. Bet kalbant apie pesticidų ribojimus, turime prisiminti, kad jais laukai purškiami ne šiaip sau.
Excuse me, colleague. Well, we have a micro problem, so I will give you a minute again. But please switch the micro. It's working.
Ačiū pirmininkė, mėly kolegos, gerbima komisarė.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, Commissioner, I agree. We need to protect biodiversity. We need climate action. But when it comes to pesticide use, we have to take full cognizance of the fact that we do not use them just for fun. When they are used, sometimes the yield increase threefold. The use must be limited, but we must allow farmers to have alternative methods. Measures must be fair. Colleagues have stated that. Pesticide use in the EU differs from country to country. There are some countries where, for example, in Lithuania, use is 10 times lower than in others. And so with the new genetic procedures, we can make our plants more resistant and resilient to climate change. These techniques will mean that we can protect our biodiversity.
Procedure, and now I'd like to ask to take the floor for the Commission, Commissioner Kyriakides. Please, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members, first of all, I'd like to thank you for this very fruitful debate and a lively debate. And of course, many points were raised and I listened to them carefully. There's just one or two points that I feel that I need to touch on. First of all, it was said by an honourable speaker that we have not listened to anyone, I think the words were used, in relation to glyphosate, and I just want to say that this is not the case. We have had extensive consultations and taken in all scientific opinions, and with EFSA, and with the European Chemical Agency, and with stakeholders, and of course we will continue to listen. There was also, several speakers mentioned the issue to do with the access that farmers could have to alternatives to chemical pesticides. And in the SUR proposal, there are numerous measures which are intended to incentivize the use of low-risk and biocontrol substances. And we are already working with member states and industry and stakeholders to further accelerate the transition. And this is outlined in the Commission's response to the Article 241 Council decision. And possibly some of these legislative actions that co-legislators could consider in the context of the SUR negotiations are, for example, allowing provisional authorizations at member state level for biocontrol products or allowing unlimited approvals at EU level for biocontrol active substances. And finally, in the comments that I heard coming up several times, that there is a total ban in the use in sensitive areas. And in the Commission non-paper, there is no total ban pesticides in the use on sensitive areas. The ban is only for the more hazardous pesticides, and what we are actually advocating is the use of low-risk and biocontrol products. So I will just like to say here that as in many other files that we find ourselves debating in this plenary, there are many different views. Emphasis is placed in different ways, but these different views should not stop us from making progress on this proposal. And I have many, many times repeatedly said that the Commission is open to potential solutions, to finding workable and effective compromises on the main points of concern in the proposal. And once the Council agrees in its general approach, I very much look forward to the interinstitutional trilogue meetings, because I believe that they will allow us to make progress on this file. And ultimately, what we are trying to all together do is meet the expectations of citizens, of consumers, of farmers, and of course of other pesticide users. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kyriakides. Now I would like to give the floor to Rapporteur Sarah Wiener. The floor is yours, as you are here. So.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, that was an exciting discussion, and I'm left with the question as rapporteur whether some members have actually read this, because there is no sweeping reduction either for farmers or for member states. There is an exception that is apply to your country, for example. Mr. Liese, you can repeat this whole idea of protecting specific countries, but there is a paragraph for regional reduction programs being recognized by the SIR. We have extended the resources for farmers to provide them with advice to protect them from expensive imports. And they need to understand what needs to be done there. We have farmers who are part of society, want their environment to be protected, their drinking water to be clean, and the future generations to be cared for. So perhaps it's useful in a campaign for an election to use these sweeping statements that you've voiced this morning. But we need to look at the detail of the SUR and not to make these sweeping statements and try to scare people. We need to keep an eye on the future, move forward, do what's good for everybody, because if it's good for everybody, for the environment, for the farmers, for us, for children, then it's a win-win situation and it's viable for the future. So we need a reduction of pesticides, overall target 50% by 2030. We need to begin now. If it's not achieved, then the Commission can change it. What are you afraid of? Let's work together, have a good vote on SIR tomorrow, and not try, as the Agri Committee has been doing, to keep everything where it is and simply lead us into the desert. I'm convinced that together we can do it. I'd like to thank the shadow rapporteurs and the members, and I am a farmer myself, and what I want is a viable country and a viable future. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Therefore, we have concluded the debate on this point of the agenda, and the vote will take place tomorrow. The next point on the agenda is a report by Bas Eickhout, strengthening the CO2 emission performance targets for new heavy-duty vehicles. And we'll now give the floor to Mr. Eickhout, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. That was an interesting debate on pesticides. We now shift to heavy-duty vehicles, trucks and buses, and also there we have some